At 30, Delia Reyes had been sleeping in her car for 11 months when a letter caught up with her at the county shelter, sent by a lawyer she had never called, in a valley she had never seen. It said a woman named Verna Taliver had died and left her everything she owned. 112 acres of apple trees gone wild in a sinking farmhouse at the end of a gravel road. Delia had never heard the name. She had no family, no money for the bus, and every reason to believe it was a mistake or a cruel joke. But the deed had her full name on it. The orchard was real. And somewhere in that overgrown place, a stranger had spent 24 years writing her letters she never mailed. What those letters held would finally explain the one thing Delia had spent her whole life trying to understand. That morning, Delia knew none of it. That morning, she only knew the radiator. The county shelter ran out of the basement of an old church, and her cot sat closest to the heat, which knocked all night like a person wanting to be let in. By now, she slept through it. She slept through most of it. A woman 2 cots down talked to people who were not there. A man near the stairs coughed in fits that never quite ended. After 11 months, none of it reached her. What reached her was the small things. She kept them in a gym bag with a broken zipper she fixed every few days with a twist of wire, a change of clothes, a toothbrush in a sandwich bag, an orange-handled hand trowel from the garden center where she once worked, and one photograph, soft at the corners from being held, of a young woman with Delia's same dark eyes squinting into the sun. On the back, in pencil faded almost to nothing, was a single word, Mama. Delia did not remember her. Her mother had died when she was 7, and the years after had worn the memory down to almost nothing. She kept the photo anyway. It was the only proof she had that she came from someone. She was up before the lights. She always was. Rolling her blanket and tucking the bag under the cot, she crossed to the windowsill by the coffee urn where a geranium sat half dead in a cracked plastic pot. Somebody had carried it in months ago and forgotten it. The leaves had gone yellow and the soil had pulled away from the sides. Delia pinched off the dead growth with hands that had done it 10,000 times in another life and poured a little of her water cup into the dirt. "You waste good drinking water on that thing every day," the man near the stairs said. He said it most mornings. It had become a kind of greeting between them. "It's not dead yet," Delia said. "It's mostly dead. Mostly isn't all the way." She set the cup down and turned the pot a quarter turn toward the gray light. It just needs somebody to remember it's there. At breakfast, she took her tray to the end of the long table, and when a boy came through late, maybe 9 or 10, the last off the cold weather van with his mother, Delia slid half her toast and the whole orange onto his plate without making it a thing. The mother started to speak. Delia gave one small shake of her head, and the woman let it go. People at the bottom learn that fast. You take the kindness when it comes, and you pass it on when you can, and you never make either one a speech. That was who she was, 11 months in. She had nothing, and she still gave things away. It was not a plan. It was only the shape her hands had always made. How she got there is a short, hard story, and she told it to no one. She had aged out of foster care at 18 with a duffel and a bus pass, the same as every kid the system finishes with. But she got lucky in one thing. An old woman who ran a garden center on the edge of the city hired her to haul bags of soil and water flats of seedlings, and it turned out Delia had hands that things grew for. She stayed a long time. She learned to graft and prune and read a leaf for whatever was wrong with it. A one-room apartment over a tire shop became hers with a key of her own. For the first time in her life, she had a place she was allowed to come back to. Then the old woman retired and sold the garden center to a chain, and the chain closed it and let everyone go in a single afternoon. Delia took a warehouse job because it was the one that called back. 6 months in, a loaded pallet shifted and she caught it wrong, and something tore in her lower back that never set right again. The job let her go. The bills did not. She fell behind on the rent fast. All at once, the floor just gone out from under her, and the landlord changed the locks while she was at the clinic begging for a refill she could not pay for. After that, it was the Corolla. A 2004 with 190,000 miles and a heater that worked if she hit the dash. She slept in it through spring and summer and into the fall, parking behind a closed grocery, always moving before dawn. Then in November, the engine threw a rod on the interstate, and that was the end of the car. A county van picked her up off the shoulder in the rain. The church basement had been home ever since. So when the shelter coordinator came down the stairs holding an envelope and calling her name, Delia did not think good news. Nobody at the bottom thinks good news when their name gets called. Reyes, Delia Reyes. The coordinator was a tired woman with reading glasses pushed up into her hair. "This came for you. Certified you had to sign, so I signed for you. Hope that's all right." Delia took it slowly. She had not held a piece of mail with her own name on it in almost a year. The return address was printed in the corner. Devra Aldis, attorney at law, and a street in a town called Renfrew she had never heard of. "It's a lawyer," she said. "I saw that. I don't owe anybody enough to send a lawyer." She turned it over. The flap was sealed thick. "It's a scam. They send these to shelters. They figure somebody down here will call a number and hand over a bank account they don't even have." "Maybe," the coordinator said. "Open it anyway. Worst it does is waste a minute." She opened it standing up because sitting down to bad news always felt worse than taking it on her feet. The letter inside ran one page, clean and short, the kind of careful writing that costs by the word. It informed Miss Delia Marie Reyes that she had been named the sole beneficiary of the estate of Verna May Tolliver, late of Renfrew, deceased the previous July. The estate consisted of real property, 112 acres with improvements, and certain personal effects. Miss Reyes was asked to contact the office at her earliest convenience to begin transfer of title. There was a phone number, there was nothing else. Delia read it twice. Then she laughed. One short sound with nothing behind it. "What?" the coordinator said. "Somebody left me a farm." She handed it over. 112 acres. Apple trees. From a woman named Verna Tolliver. She shook her head. "I have never heard that name in my life. So either it's a scam, or it's a mix-up, or there's another Delia Reyes out there whose lawyer can't spell." The coordinator read it slowly, then lowered her glasses onto her nose and read it again. "This doesn't read like a scam, honey." She tapped the page. "Scams want you to send money. This one wants to give you land, and it's got your middle name." Delia stopped. "What? Delia Marie Reyes. That your middle name?" It was. Marie after a grandmother she never met. Her mother had told her that once, in the only memory Delia still had of her voice, she had not written that name on a form in years. It was not on her shelter intake. It was not on anything a stranger could pull off the internet. "Yeah," she said quietly, "that's mine." The two women looked at each other. "Use the office phone," the coordinator said. "Call the number, you don't give them 1 cent, and you don't sign one thing over the phone. But you call. You hear me. You call that number." The office was a closet with a desk in it. Delia dialed with the door open because she did not trust closed doors anymore. It rang twice. "Aldous Law Office. My name is Delia Reyes." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "I got a letter about a Verna Tolliver." There was a pause, and then the voice on the line changed. It was the sound a person makes when a thing they had given up waiting for finally walks through the door. "Miss Reyes." A long breath. "I have been trying to find you for 4 months. I am so glad you called." "I think there's been a mistake," Delia said. "I don't know any Verna Tolliver. I've never been to Renfrew. I can't think of one reason my name would be on anything." "There's no mistake," the lawyer said. "Your full legal name, your date of birth, the hospital you were born in. Mrs. Tolliver gave me all of it and made me promise to keep looking until I found you. I have a death certificate, a will, and a deed in a folder with your name on the front, and I have had them 4 months with nobody to give them to." Delia gripped the edge of the desk. Her back twinged, and she ignored it. "Why?" she said. "Why would a woman I never met leave me anything? People don't do that, not for me." "Miss Reyes," the lawyer's voice was kind and very careful. "I think the answer is in the house. Mrs. Tolliver left things there she would not let me read. She was firm about it, she said. When the girl comes, she'll find them herself." That was how she spoke about you. The girl. The whole time I knew her. For a moment, Delia could not say anything. Out in the hall, a tray clattered. Somebody laughed. The radiator knocked in the far room. The ordinary noise of the bottom of the world. "I don't have a way to get there," she finally said. "No car, no bus fare, nothing. I'm calling from a shelter. That's the part your folder leaves out. The Delia Reyes you found is homeless," she said it flat. To end it, to watch the kindness go cold once it learned what she actually was. That was how it always went. It did not go cold. "Then that decides it." The lawyer said, "You should come right away. There's a bus that runs north up the valley. Be at your station tomorrow morning and there will be a ticket waiting in your name. Paid. The estate covers it. The estate covers everything from here. You don't put down $1, Miss Reyes. Not one. You just come." Delia closed her eyes. The geranium. The boy's plate. The photo of a woman she could not remember. 11 months of moving before dawn so nobody would see where she slept. "Why are you helping me?" she said. "You don't know me either." "No," the lawyer said. "But Verna did. And she asked me to, so I am." That night she could not sleep and the radiator had nothing to do with it. She lay on the cot with the letter folded against her chest and turned the name over and over in the dark. Verna Tolliver. Verna Tolliver. She reached for it like a word stuck on the tip of her tongue, and it simply was not there. No face came. No house. No reason. Only the strange, frightening fact that somewhere a woman had known her birthday and her dead grandmother's name and had spent years asking a lawyer to find her. The man near the stairs coughed. The woman 2 cots down kept talking to no one. Delia thought about not going. She thought about it hard. Going meant hoping, and hope had a price she had stopped being able to pay. Every good thing in her life had been a door that opened just far enough to show her a warm room before it shut on her hand. The garden center. The apartment. The key that was hers until it wasn't. If she rode north and the whole thing came apart, if it really was a mistake, she would have to crawl back to this same cot with the hope burned out of her, and she did not know if she had enough left in her to survive that. But she kept circling one line. The girl. She'll find them herself. The whole time I knew her, somebody had been waiting for her. Delia had spent her life being the one who waited, in offices and hallways and parked cars, for a call that never came, for a name to be read out that was never hers. Now a dead woman she could not picture had flipped the whole thing around and stood waiting on the far end of it. She got up before the lights again. The geranium got its last watering. The pot turned toward the window. She gave the boy her orange. At the door, the coordinator pressed a 20 into her hand and would not hear no. For food on the way, the woman said. Don't argue with me, Reyes. Go find out who waited for you. The bus pulled out a little after 7 and climbed north out of the city for 3 hours, and Delia watched the world change through the smeared glass. Gray streets gave way to brown fields, then low blue hills, then country she had no name for. Orchards started showing up along the road, long straight rows of trees with the last red fruit still hanging on them. Ladders leaning here and there, empty crates stacked at the row ends. She did not understand why the sight of them pulled her throat tight. She blamed it on being tired and hungry and afraid. The bus let her off at the edge of a small town as the light was going. Renfrew, said a faded sign by the square under a population number nobody had updated in decades. A diner, a hardware store, a church and a feed store with a sagging porch. A town that shut at 6 and meant it. A heavy-set man at the station told her the Tolliver place was 5 miles out the county road, and offered, before she could ask, to run her there in the back of his truck. People in the valley did that, she would learn. They helped before you got the question out. He let her off at the head of a long gravel drive and pointed. Down there, mind the holes. Verna's been gone a few months now, and Saul only mows it the once. He hesitated, like he wanted to say more, then only touched his cap. You family? I don't know what I am, Delia said honestly. He nodded like that was a fair answer and drove off. And the sound of his engine faded out until there was nothing left but wind moving through 1,000 trees she could not yet see in the dusk. The drive ran downhill between 2 banks of tall dead grass. At the bottom stood a gate, a plain farm gate gone silver gray, hanging crooked on its one good hinge. Across the topboard, in paint worn nearly back into the wood, someone had lettered a name by hand a long time ago. Delia stepped close and tilted her head to catch the last of the light and read it. Tolliver Orchard. And under it, smaller, in the same patient hand, all who come are fed. She stood there with her broken zippered bag on her shoulder, her $30-odd, her trowel, and her mother's photograph. A homeless woman at the end of a road she had never driven, reading the name of a stranger who had somehow known her own. The wind came up the rows and carried a smell she did not yet have a word for. Sweet and sharp, and a little like rain. The smell of fruit left too long on the branch. Then, off to her left in the deep grass, something moved. Delia turned. A dog stood watching her, an old dog, gray around the muzzle, its coat near the color of the dead grass it stood in, so that she had not seen it until it shifted its weight. It did not bark. It did not come closer. It only looked at her with a steady, patient attention, like an animal that had been expecting her a long time and had nearly given up. Her hand found the cold topboard of the gate. She pushed, and it swung inward with a low complaint of metal, and Delia Reyes stepped through onto the land that was somehow impossibly hers. The grass closed over the path almost at once. Delia followed what was left of a track between the rows. Her shoes wet through inside a dozen steps, the old dog pacing her at a distance she did not try to close. Above her, the trees stood in long, crooked lines, heavy and dark, and the ground beneath them was soft and rotten with fallen fruit. She felt it give under her feet. She smelled it, that sweet ferment thick on the cold air, and she understood without being told that nobody had picked this orchard in a full season. The farmhouse rose up out of the dusk at the end of the rows, 2 stories of pale board with a porch that sagged on one end, no light in any window. A barn stood off behind it, and a smaller building past that, low and long, with a stovepipe through the roof. Delia stopped at the foot of the porch steps and could not quite climb them. The house had the silence of a place where somebody had recently stopped living. Headlights swung across the yard. A truck came down a second track from the far side, an old flatbed with one-week headlamp, and it rolled to a stop 20 feet off and sat there with the engine running. The dog trotted toward it, tail low and easy. The door opened and a man climbed out, slow, an old man slow, careful with his knees. He was tall and gone thin, in a canvas coat with white stubble and a flashlight he did not yet point at her. "This is private land," he said. His voice was level. "Has been all my life, and I'm no young man. You want to tell me what you're doing on it?" "My name is Delia Reyes." She kept her hands where he could see them, an old reflex. "A lawyer in town sent me. Devra Aldous, she said this place was left to me." The flashlight came up then and found her face and held there, and she made herself stand in it without flinching. She knew what he saw. A worn-out woman with a broken bag and wet shoes, claiming she owned a man's whole world. "Left to you," he said. "I have the letter." She dug it out slowly and held it into the light. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't know her. I came because the lawyer paid the bus, and I had nowhere else to be." He came close enough to take the letter, and he read it slow, then read it again, his lips moving on the second pass. The dog sat down between them and leaned its weight against Delia's leg, and she felt the heat of it come through her wet jeans, and her shoulders came down from around her ears for the first time in days. The man watched the dog do it. His face changed. "Tully doesn't lean on people," he said. "Hasn't since Verna." Tully. Delia put her hand down and the dog pushed its head up under it. "That's a good name." Verna named her after a fiddle player she liked. He lowered the flashlight. "I'm Saul. I worked this orchard for her near my whole life. I've been feeding that dog and mowing one path and waiting to find out what happens to all of it." He folded the letter along its creases and handed it back careful, like it was worth more now than it had been a minute ago. "And I guess what happens to it is you." "I think there's been a mistake," Delia said. It was the third time she had said it that day. It was getting harder to mean. Saul looked at her a long moment in the near dark. Then he asked a question that had nothing to do with deeds or lawyers, and it landed in her like a stone dropped down a well. "You don't remember this place, do you?" he said. Delia went still. "What?" "Nothing." He turned toward the house, but she saw him file it away, saw it bother him. "You're soaked through and it's getting cold." Verna kept the power on out of habit, and the estate kept paying it. "There's a stove inside, and there's food." First thing first. He climbed the sagging steps and the boards held under him, and he looked back at her standing frozen in the yard. "Come on then. You read the gate. All who come are fed." She meant it. She fed half this county one time or another. Wouldn't do to start breaking her rules the week you show up. The kitchen was the first room he lit, and it stopped Delia in the doorway. It was painted yellow, a soft, faded butter yellow, the paint old and worn thin around the light switches. And against the far wall stood a blue enamel coffee pot on a stove older than Delia herself. None of it meant anything to her, she told herself that, standing in the doorway. None of it meant a thing. And still her eyes filled up out of nowhere, fast and hot, with no thought attached to them at all, and she turned her face away so the old man would not see. Saul saw. He did not say anything. He put the kettle on and opened a cupboard and started laying things on the table. Bread and a jar of apple butter and a wedge of hard cheese, and a tin of soup he worked open with a hand crank. "She put up this apple butter herself," he said. "There's a winter's worth in the cellar. No sense it going to waste." He set a bowl down in front of Delia and nodded at the chair. "Sit. You look like you'll go over." She sat. She ate, and tried not to do it too fast, and could not manage that, and Saul turned his back and busied himself at the stove to give her the dignity of being hungry alone. When she finally slowed, he poured 2 cups from the blue pot and sat down across from her with his big hands flat on the table. "Tell me how you didn't know her," he said. "Because that woman knew you. I'd like to understand how both of those are true." So Delia told him. The shelter, the letter, the middle name a stranger had no way to know, the lawyer who had hunted 4 months for a homeless woman to hand a farm to. She told it plain and watched it land on him and watched him turn it over. "Verna had me drive her into town 2 springs back," Saul said slowly, "to that lawyer's office. Wouldn't say why, she was in there the better part of an afternoon and came out lighter, like she'd set down something she'd been carrying a long while." He looked at the dark window. "Told me on the way home. She said, 'Saul, I finally did the one thing I never managed to do.' I asked her what thing. She just patted my arm and said, 'You'll know when she comes. He'll find her if it takes the last of my money,' he being the lawyer, she." He brought his eyes back to Delia, she. Delia's coffee had gone cold in her hands. "I don't understand any of this." "No," Saul said. "But she did. So we'll go slow and let her tell it. She left things for you in this house, the lawyer told me that much. Verna wouldn't let anybody else read them. Said the girl would find them herself. He stood and rinsed his cup. Not tonight. Tonight you sleep. The little room at the top of the stairs has a bed made up. It's aired and clean. I keep it that way. He stopped at the door with his coat half on. She kept it that way first. I just took it over. Delia slept that night under a patchwork quilt in a small room she did not look at too closely in the dark, with the old dog lying across the doorway, and for the first time in 11 months she did not jolt awake before dawn to move along. She woke to light. The orchard in daylight was another thing entirely. She stood on the porch with the cold coffee Saul had left, and looked at 112 acres of trees in their long failing rows, and her chest hurt at the sight of it. Every branch hung loaded. The fruit had ripened and gone past ripe and begun to fall, and the ground beneath the rows was a carpet of it, red and gold going brown. The wasps already working it over, a whole crop rotting back into the dirt because there had been nobody to take it down. Delia had spent her life around growing things, and the sight of all that fruit dropping unpicked struck her as grief made visible. Somebody had grown it. Somebody had pruned and sprayed and prayed over these trees for a lifetime, and then she had died and the trees had gone right on doing the one thing they knew how to do, which was give, into a year when nobody came to take what they gave. She did not decide to do anything. Her body decided. She set the cup on the rail and walked down into the nearest row and reached up into the lowest branch, and her hand closed around an apple and turned it the quarter twist that snaps the stem clean without tearing the spur, and it came off into her palm. She did it again. She did it without thinking. The picker's reach and turn she carried in her hands from another life, and she had filled the front of her shirt before she understood she had started. That was where Saul found her an hour later. 3 crates filled from the windfall, and 1 tree half stripped, working steady down the row with leaves in her hair. He stood at the end of the row and watched her a while before she noticed him. When she did, she stopped, embarrassed, an apple in each hand. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know why It felt wrong to watch it rot." "Don't apologize." His voice had gone rough. He came down the row and crouched by her crates and turned one of the apples over, checking it, nodding at how clean she'd pulled it. "You've picked before. I worked at a garden center. 8 seasons." She wiped her hands on her jeans, mostly seedlings and nursery stock. "The old woman who owned it kept a few dwarf trees out back and taught me to prune them. I liked the trees best of anything there." Saul stayed crouched a long moment, looking at the half-stripped tree. "Verna used to say a thing," he said. "She said an orchard doesn't belong to you. You belong to it. You look after it till the next one comes." He stood with a hand on his knee. "First night you walk onto this place, that dog leans on you. Next morning I find you out here saving the crop with your bare hands and nobody asked. I've been trying since last night to make this make sense." He looked at her, starting to think the woman knew exactly what she was doing. They picked together the rest of that day. Saul brought a wagon down behind the small tractor, and they loaded crates onto it, and he named the rows for her as they worked, because the rows had names. The old block was Northern Spy and Winesap, planted by Verna's father before her. The far corner she'd called the Orphans, odd trees Verna had grafted herself from cuttings people gave her, an Arkansas black so dark it looked bruised, a russet nobody could name. By dusk they had a barn bay half full of sound fruit, and Delia's back ached, an honest soreness she had almost forgotten, and she found she did not mind it. The lawyer came out the next morning. Davra Aldous was younger than her careful letters had made her sound, a brisk woman in a quilted vest who shook Delia's hand with both of hers and held on a beat too long, studying her face like she was checking it against something. "You have her chin," Devra said, and then caught herself. "I'm sorry, that's not. You couldn't. I've just been looking at Verna's face across a desk for a long time, and I came out here half expecting." She let it go. "Forgive me. Let's sit. There are things you need to understand, and one of them isn't good." They sat at the yellow table. Devra spread the file open, the death certificate, the will, the deed with Delia's full name typed across it, and walked her through it line by line. The orchard, the house, the outbuildings, the equipment. A small account that had paid the taxes and the power and Saul's wages and kept the dog fed, with enough left to carry the place a year, maybe a little more, if Delia was careful and the roof held. Verna had signed all of it in front of 2 witnesses and a doctor's letter was clipped to the back, a letter that said in plain words that Verna May Tolliver was of entirely sound mind and knew exactly what she was doing and why. "She made me get that letter," Devra said, tapping it. "I told her it was unusual." She said, "Devra, somebody is going to stand up after I'm gone and say I was a confused old woman who got taken in. I wanted on paper from a doctor that I was not. Get me the letter." Devra looked up. And here we are. Somebody's standing up, Delia said. Verna had a great-nephew, Curtis. Devra said the name with care. Her brother's grandson. They were close once. A long way back. And then there was a falling out nobody ever fully explained to me. And they didn't speak again for the rest of her life. He's a contractor 2 valleys over. His business is underwater, he's got a sick child, and a land developer has been at him for months waving real money at these 112 acres because the town is growing this direction and the road out here is good. She closed the folder. 3 weeks ago, Curtis filed to challenge the will. He says his aunt was not competent. He says a stranger, you, worked on a vulnerable old woman to cut out her own blood. Delia laughed once, helpless. I met her 2 days ago. She's been dead since July. I never laid eyes on the woman in my life. I know that, Devra said. And the doctor's letter knows it, and the witnesses know it. But a contest like this can run a year and cost more than the estate has. He's not betting he'll win, Delia. He's betting you'll fold. You're a woman with nothing and no lawyer of your own. The easiest thing in the world for you to do is sign a quitclaim, take a few $1,000s to go away, and let him sell the whole place to the developer for the warehouse they want to drop here. She let it sit. I'm telling you so you know what you walked into. Not to scare you off. Verna would skin me for scaring you off. Delia looked out the window at the rows, at the barn bay with 2 days of saved fruit in it, at the old dog asleep in a square of sun on the porch. A warehouse, she said. A distribution center, last I heard. The trees come out first. For a long moment, Delia said nothing. Then she stood and gathered the cold cups off the table out of the old habit of being useful in other people's houses. I don't know the first thing about a lawsuit, she said. I really don't, but I know I'm not signing anything today. And I know those apples in the barn don't deserve to rot because grown people are fighting over the dirt under them. She set the cups in the sink. Tell me what I have to do to not lose it this week. We can figure out the rest of the year when it gets here. Devra looked at her, and something eased in the lawyer's face. The look of a person who has carried a worry alone and just felt one hand take the other side of it. That, Devra said, is almost word for word what she'd have said. She stood. Don't sign anything. Don't talk to Curtis or any developer without me in the room. Stay on the property. Keep the lights on. Keep doing what you're doing. Possession and intent matter. A woman living here, working the trees, is a very different picture for a judge than an empty lot waiting to be sold. She gathered her things. I'll handle the filing. You handle the orchard. And Delia, whatever Verna left you in this house, find it. The judge is going to want to know why she did this. I would dearly love to be able to tell him. That evening, after Sol had gone home and the house had settled into its night sounds, Delia could not sleep. She sat on the floor of the little upstairs room with the dog beside her and her mother's photograph in her hands, and she tried once more to find Verna Tolliver somewhere in herself, the same as she'd tried on the bus and the cot, and again came up with nothing but that yellow kitchen and the hot rush behind her eyes it had no right to cause. Tully got up. The dog crossed the hall and stopped at a closed door Delia had not opened, the room at the front of the house, and stood there with her nose to the gap at the bottom and her tail moving slow. When Delia did not come, the dog looked back at her, then at the door, plain as speech. Delia got up and opened it. The room beyond was a girl's room, kept. A narrow bed with a quilt, a shelf of paperbacks gone soft with age, a window that looked down the rows. Dust lay over all of it, but it was a made room, a waited-on room, and on the wall hung a framed photograph of a young woman with a wide, laughing face, maybe 19, standing in the orchard in summer with her arms full of blossom. Delia did not know her. Still, she stood in front of that picture a long time because the girl in it had a way of looking at the camera that made Delia feel absurdly like she was being looked at herself. Against the far wall stood a dresser. Tully went to the bottom drawer, scratched it once, lightly, and lay down. Delia knelt and pulled the drawer open. It was deep, and it was full, and it was not clothes. It was letters. Dozens of them, more than dozens, bundled and tied with string in stacks, each stack labeled in a slanting hand with a year. The oldest string at the bottom had gone brittle and brown. The newest sat on top, the envelope crisp and unsealed, with no stamp on it because it had never been meant for any mailbox. Every last one of them was addressed in that same slanting hand to the same name. Delia, her own name written over and over across 24 winters by a woman she could not remember, in a drawer in a dead stranger's house. Her hands shook as she lifted the top bundle free. She slid the first letter from its envelope and unfolded it under the lamp, and read the first line, and the room went very quiet around her, and the old dog let out a long breath against her knee. Dear Delia, it began, you won't remember me, but I have not forgotten one day of you. You were 6 years old. The letter went on, the autumn your mother brought you down my road in a car that smelled of cigarettes and rain. She came to pick. We always needed hands in October, and I never asked anybody too many questions about where they came from, which is why my bunkhouse was always full of people who had run out of other roads. Your mother said her name was Camille and that she could work, and she could. But it was you, I remember. You were the noisiest small thing that ever came through this place, and the house had been quiet a long time before you, and you filled it right up to the rafters. Delia stopped reading. She sat very still on the floor of the kept room with the lamp throwing a yellow circle around her, and she said the name out loud into the empty house. Camille, she said. The word did nothing for a moment. Then it pressed back. Not a memory, not yet. Just a weight behind the name like a door with something heavy leaned against the far side. Her mother's name was Camille. Delia had always known that much. It was on the one document the state had given her, a name with no story attached to it. But nobody had ever said it to her like this woman said it, with a whole season folded up inside it. She read on, fast now, then made herself slow down. You talked to my chickens like they owed you money, Verna wrote. You named the mean rooster Mister, and you forgave him every time he came at you. Saul carved you a little apple out of cherry wood because you wouldn't stop trying to bite the real ones off the low branches before they were ripe, and you carried that wooden one everywhere. You tried to eat that too. You slept with it. Your mother sang you down every night in the bunkhouse. The same song, something about going down to the river to wait, and the whole row could hear her through the thin walls and nobody minded, because it was the prettiest sound this farm had heard in years. Delia put the letter down in her lap and pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, because she could hear it. Faint, far off, under all the years, a woman's low voice singing about a river and the water and waiting there, and the smell of apples, and a warm yellow room. She had carried those three things her whole life without knowing where they came from. She had told herself they were nothing, the scraps a mind makes up to fill the place where a mother should be. They were not made up. They were this. They were here. They had a road and a kitchen and a name. She could not stay in the house with it. She took up the lantern and walked out across the dark yard to the long, low building, and pushed the door and stood among the empty bunks in the cold. She did not know what she was looking for. Then she breathed in the smell of old wood and cold wood smoke and apples, and it went straight past every year in between. And for 1 second she was small and warm, with a low voice singing about a river 2 feet from her face and a smooth wooden thing pressed into her fist. Then it was gone, and she was a grown woman standing alone in a cold shed, crying without having decided to. She read until the lamp guttered, and Sol's words from the first night made a terrible new sense. You don't remember this place, do you? He had known. He had stood in the yard and watched a grown woman walk back through that gate, and he had known exactly who she was. She slept a few hours on the narrow bed in the kept room, under the photograph of the laughing girl, and she did not yet know that the girl's name was Ada, or that the room had been hers. She found that out in the morning from Saul, when she came down with the first bundle of letters held against her chest and her eyes raw, and laid them on the yellow table and asked him to tell her everything he had been not telling her. He sat down heavy. He turned his coffee cup a slow half-circle on the table before he spoke. Her name was Ada, he said. Verna's girl. That room upstairs was hers. Verna lost her husband young, a bad heart, and after that it was just the two of them out here, her and Ada, running the whole place. And Ada was... He stopped, started again. Ada was the brightest thing, laughed like her mother. Then one winter the road iced over and a truck came around the bend too fast, and that was that. She was 19. Verna found her. He pressed his lips together. After that the house just went quiet. Verna kept the orchard because the trees don't let you quit on them. But the life went out of the place. She started keeping that bunkhouse open to anybody who needed it, mothers especially, women with kids and nowhere to land, and I always thought it was so there'd be noise in the world again, so the quiet wouldn't win. And then we came, Delia said, and then you came. Saul looked at her, and his old eyes were wet, and he did not bother hiding it. You don't know what you did to this place that fall. You were a holy terror, 6, and into everything, talking the legs off everybody. He almost smiled. She taught you to call the trees by name. You couldn't say wine sap, came out of you as wine sip, and she laughed so hard she had to sit down on the porch step. Called that whole block wine sip long after you were gone, just to remember the sound of you saying it wrong. And Verna, he shook his head. Verna started singing in the kitchen again. I hadn't heard her do it since Ada. She'd set you up on the counter to snap beans and teach you the words to her songs, and you'd sing them back at the top of your lungs while she cooked. For 1 October, this farm had a child in it again. He wrapped both hands around the cold cup. Then one morning the bunkhouse was empty. Your mother packed you up in the dark and drove off down the road and never said a word to anybody. Left the wooden apple on the bunkhouse step. Verna kept that apple in her apron pocket the rest of her life. Delia could not speak. We never knew why, Saul said. Your mother was running from something, anybody could see that. A man, most likely. She'd flinch when a truck she didn't know came up the drive. I think she got scared. I think she'd let herself get happy here, and that frightened her worse than being unhappy ever did. So she ran before anybody could take it from her, or before she could start to need it. He finally looked up. Verna near grieved you like a second loss. She'd already buried a daughter. Then she lost a borrowed one. And she spent the rest of her days trying to get you back. If you have made it this far into Delia's story, hit subscribe and stay with me, because what comes next is the part I have been waiting to tell you. Because Verna Tolliver did not just miss that little girl. She went looking for her, and she never stopped. And the proof of it sat in a drawer upstairs in stacks tied with string, year after year of a search nobody alive had known she was running. Delia read the rest of the letters over the following days, one bundle at a time, oldest to newest. She read them at the yellow table and on the porch and out in the rows with her back against a northern spy. She read what Verna had done with the leaving. The early bundles were grief, plain and simple. A lonely woman writing to a child who could not answer. I tell myself you're warm tonight, one of them said. I tell myself your mother found her feet. I made too much soup again. I keep doing that. Then they changed. Then they turned into a campaign. Verna had hired a man, some sort of finder, and the letters began to carry news of him. He found a Camille Reyes who had worked a cannery 2 states off and lost the trail at a bus station. He found a school that had a Delia for half a year and then did not. Verna paid that man for a long time, the letters said so, paid him out of Apple money she did not have, and chased her own borrowed child clear across a map. Some of the letters were not about the search at all. You'd be near grown now, one of them said, from a year when Delia would have been finishing high school somewhere far away. I kept the bunkhouse open again this season. A young woman came through with twins and I gave them your old corner. And I hope that wherever you are, somebody is doing the same for you. I leave the porch light on at night. I know it is foolish. An old woman with a light on for a girl who can't even remember her face. I leave it on anyway. Then came the letter Delia had to set down and walk away from twice before she could finish it. The man had found a death certificate. Camille Reyes had died of an untreated infection in a county hospital the spring after she left the orchard, when Delia was 7. She had been alone. And there was a line in the record about a minor child taken into state care, no relatives located, name withheld. I drove 4 hours to that county, Verna wrote, in a hand gone shaky. They sat me down in an office and I told them I knew that child. I told them she had stayed on my farm, that I would take her, that I had room and means and love enough. They were kind to me, and they told me what I already knew. I was nobody to her, not blood, not kin, not a name on any paper. They could not hand a child over to a stranger because the stranger missed her. I understood it. I would have wanted them to be that careful with Ada. I drove home in the dark, and I did not sing for a year. Delia sat with that one a long time. For most of her life, nobody had come looking for her. She had built her whole self around that single cold fact, the certainty that she was a child nobody had claimed. Here, in a dead woman's slanting hand, was the proof that somebody had come. Somebody had driven 4 hours and stood in an office and offered to take her home, and been turned away at the door and gone on grieving a stranger's child for the rest of her life. It was on the 4th day, while Delia was reading on the porch, that the second truck came down the drive. This one was newer, a contractor's pickup with a ladder rack, and the man who got out did not climb down slow. He came across the yard fast, a heavy-set man in his 40s in a quilted flannel, with a hard, worried face and the particular anger of somebody who has rehearsed a speech the whole drive over. You're the one, he said. It was not a question. You're the one she gave it to. Delia stood up. Tully came off the porch boards and put herself between them without a sound. You must be Curtis, Delia said. Don't. He stopped at the steps. Up close, the anger had something underneath it. A man stretched to breaking. Don't you stand on my aunt's porch and say my name like you know me. You never met her, you hear me. I'm her blood. I'm the only blood she had left in this world, and some stranger off the street ends up with 112 acres. And you want to tell me that's not exactly what it looks like? I don't know what it looks like to you, Delia said quietly. I found out she existed 8 days ago. Right, he laughed, an ugly sound with no bottom to it. You found out, and here you are, moved into her house wearing. He gestured at her, at the flannel shirt Saul had lent her against the cold. You don't even have your own clothes. You came here with nothing, and you're walking out with everything, and I'm supposed to believe you just stumbled onto it. Mister, I came here on a bus another person paid for, Delia said. I own a trowel and a photograph. If this is a con, it is the worst one con in the history of the world. Curtis, Saul had come around the side of the house, an axe handle in his fist, not raised, only held. That's enough. Stay out of this, Saul. I knew you when you were smaller than that dog, Saul said. And I knew your aunt better than anybody left alive. You want to swing at somebody. Swing at me. But you will not stand here and call this woman a thief, because she is the opposite of one. And if you'd come out here even once these last 20 winters, you'd know nobody chose anybody over you. You chose. You stayed gone. That landed somewhere. Curtis's jaw worked. For a second, the whole hard front of him wavered, and Delia saw the thing underneath it. He was not a cruel man. He was a drowning one. My daughter is sick, he said, and his voice broke on it. You know that, Saul. You know what I'm staring down. I've got a kid who needs care I can't pay for, a business 3 months from gone, and a man offering me more for this dirt than I'll ever see, and my own aunt left it to a homeless stranger out of pure spite. He scrubbed a hand down his face. She knew I needed it. She knew. And she handed it to you to punish me. For what? Delia said. What did you do to her? Curtis looked at her, and the question seemed to catch him off guard, as though he had asked it of himself 1,000 times and never landed on an answer he could live with. That's not, he started. Then he shut his mouth. That's not your business. The lawyer will be in touch. Don't get comfortable. He turned and went back to the truck, and the engine roared, and he backed up the drive too fast and was gone. The yard went quiet again. Tully sat down. Saul let out a long breath and lowered the axe handle, and his hand was trembling just slightly, an old man's hand after his blood had been up. He wasn't always like that, Saul said. There's a hurt in that boy goes a long way back, and it isn't all his doing, and it isn't all hers either. Family's a tangled thing. He set the axe handle against the rail, but he's wrong about one thing, dead wrong. Verna never did a spiteful thing in her life. Whatever she did out of love. You can stake your life on it. Delia did not settle easy that evening. She kept seeing the look on Curtis's face in the second before he hit it, and she knew that look from the inside, because she had worn it her whole life. He believed he was unwanted by the one person who had wanted him most. She had believed the very same thing about the whole world, and she had been as wrong as he was. The only difference was that somebody had finally put the proof of it in her hands, in a drawer, in a dead woman's writing. Nobody had ever put the proof in his. That night, Delia went back to the drawer. She had nearly emptied it. The bundles had thinned, the years narrowing toward the present, toward the careful unsealed letter on top that had brought her here. But underneath where the last bundle had sat, flat against the wood at the very bottom, was one more envelope she had not seen, heavier than the others, the paper good, the flap sealed with a press of red wax gone dark with age. Across the front, in that same slanting hand, pressed hard enough to score the paper, Verna had written 4 words. Open this one last. Delia knelt on the floor of Ada's room with the sealed letter in both hands and the old dog warm against her side, and she did not open it. She turned it over once and felt the weight of it, more than one page, something stiff folded inside. She set it on the bed where she could see it. Whatever was in that envelope was the bottom of everything. The thing all the other letters had been circling for 24 autumns, and some part of Delia understood that once she read it, she could never again be the woman who had not. So she waited. She wanted, for one more night, to hold the question before she had to hold the answer. The sealed letter was still on the bed the next morning when Deborah called. The mediation had a date now, 10 days out, a conference room at the county courthouse and a retired judge to sit between the two sides and try to keep it from becoming a real trial. Deborah was steady, but she was honest. Curtis's lawyer is pushing hard, she said. And the developer raised the offer again. They've put a number in front of you, Delia. A walkaway. You sign a quit claim giving up your claim, and they pay you $60,000 to go quietly. Then he sells the whole parcel and clears more than $1 million. A pause. I'm required to tell you the offer exists. I am not required to tell you to take it, and I won't. $60,000. Delia sat down on the porch step with the phone against her ear and did the arithmetic that nobody at the bottom can help doing. $60,000 was an apartment with a door that locked. It was first and last, and a deposit, a coat that fit. Groceries she did not have to count. A cushion under her for the first time in her life. It was the exact size of every door that had ever shut on her hand, swung wide open at last. And she could give Curtis his orchard. He had a sick child. He had a number from the developer that would change his family's life. All she had to do was step out of the way, take the money, and let the people with the rightful claim sort it out among themselves. It was the easy thing. More than that, it was the familiar thing. Let go first, before it gets taken. She had been doing exactly that her whole life. Can I think about it, she said. You can think about it until the morning of the mediation, Devra said. Not a minute passed. For 2 days she carried the number around with her like a stone sewn into her coat. She walked the rows with it. She did the math a dozen different ways, and it came out the same every time. $60,000. More money than she had held in her whole life, and all she had to do to earn it was the one thing she was already good at, which was leaving before she could be left. Twice, she got as far as the phone with Deborah's number under her thumb. Twice, she set it back down. And she could not have told anybody why, except that every time she pictured signing the paper, she pictured the machines behind it, the trees coming down in long rows, and the bunkhouse where her mother had sung her to sleep scraped flat into a lot. On the third morning, she found Saul in the barn, sorting the saved fruit into keepers and cider apples, and she told him about the offer, all of it, the number and the quitclaim and the child and the easy way out. He listened with his hands still working, and when she finished, he set down the apple he was holding and looked at her a long moment. "You're going to take it," he said. Not angry, just reading her. "I don't know. Maybe. He needs it more than I do. He's got a kid." Delia's voice climbed. "Saul, I've got nothing. I had nothing 11 days ago, and I'll have nothing again when this is over, except now somebody's offering me enough to start clean, and I'm supposed to say no for a stand of trees I knew about for a week. Who does that? Who turns that down?" "Verna would," Saul said. "Verna's dead." It came out harder than she meant. Saul took it without flinching. He picked up a cull apple, bruised and split, and turned it over in his big hand. "Let me tell you something about that woman," he said. "She gave away more apples than she ever sold. Every fall there'd be boxes left on porches all over this valley. No note, just there in the morning. School lunches when families came up short. Bushels to the church. She fed pickers who couldn't pay and let them sleep warm and never said a word about it after." He set the cull in the cider bin. People used to tell her she was a poor businesswoman. She'd say, "I'm not poor. You're not poor as long as you've got something to give away." Verna gave away apples her whole life, and she died the richest woman I ever knew, and there wasn't but a few $1,000s in her account when she went. He looked at Delia. "Selling this place to a man who'll bulldoze it for a warehouse isn't giving it to Curtis. It's killing it so. Two people can split the body. That isn't what she left you. She didn't leave you a pile of money to walk away with. She left you the one thing she had to give, and she spent the last good years of her life making sure it landed in your hands and nobody else's. You really going to hand it to a bulldozer for $60,000? Delia did not answer him, but she did not call Deborah to accept either. She went back up to the house into Ada's room to look at the cash one more time and make her peace with letting it go. And that was when she found the other bundle. It had been pushed to the side of the bottom drawer, behind where the stacks for Delia had stood, a smaller bundle tied in the same string. She had taken it for more of her own and never untied it. She untied it now. The envelopes were addressed in Verna's hand, the same as all the rest, but not to Delia. They were addressed to Curtis. Some of them had stamps. Some of those had been mailed and come back, a red hand stamp across the front. Returned to sender. Refused. The dates ran back a long way and forward almost to the present. Delia sat on the floor of the dead girl's room and read a stranger's mail, a man's name on every envelope, a woman writing season after season into a silence that kept mailing her own love back to her unopened. She read enough to understand the shape of it. Then she stopped, because the rest belonged to him. She borrowed Saul's truck and drove 2 valleys over with the bundle on the seat beside her. Curtis lived in a small ranch house with a wheelchair ramp built onto the front porch. The lumber still pale and new, the work of a man who could frame a ramp but maybe not pay for what rolled up it. He came to the door with his guard already up, and his face went tight when he saw who it was. "You don't get to come to my house," he said. "I'm not staying." Delia held out the bundle. "I found these in her drawer. She wrote them to you." She never stopped. She pushed them at him until he had to take them or let them fall. "Some you sent back. I think you should read the ones you never gave yourself the chance to refuse." He looked down at his own name in his aunt's handwriting, dozens of times over, and his face came apart at the seams. "I told her no," he said. His voice had gone to gravel. "First time I went under, years back I came to her. I asked her to borrow against this place so I could save my business, and she said no. She said she couldn't risk the orchard. It was all she had left of Ada and my granddad and I." He stopped. "I told her she loved a stand of trees more than her own blood. I walked out. I sent her letters back. I didn't go to her when she got old. I wasn't there when they put her in the home. I didn't go to the funeral." He was crying now, openly, a big hard man undone on his own new ramp. "I spent half my life sure she chose this dirt over me. Sure she was a cold woman who never loved anybody but a dead girl in a row of apple trees." "She wrote you every year," Delia said quietly, "even after you sent them back. She just stopped mailing them. She wrote them and put them in the drawer. I know." He pressed the bundle against his chest. "I can see that now she wrote my name in there too. 20 years of it. I just never opened mine. He looked up at her, wrecked. She'd have helped me. Any way but the one I demanded. She sent checks I tore up. She came to my wedding and I had somebody turn her around at the door. And the whole time she was writing me letters I'd never read, into a drawer, like she was talking to me through a wall I built myself. He wiped his face with the back of his hand. And I drove down to her orchard and called the woman she left it to a thief. Delia stood on the ramp and said nothing because there was nothing to say that the letters in his arms were not already saying better. A child's voice came from somewhere inside the house, thin, asking who was at the door. Curtis turned his head toward it, and the whole hard shape of him changed, all the fight going out of him at the sound of her, every part of him turning toward the next room. "That's my girl," he said. "She's 10. The treatments are 40 miles each way, and I've missed half a season of work driving her, and that's the real reason I came at your throat. Not the trees, the bills." He looked down at the letters. Aunt Verna would have driven her every mile. I knew it the second I saw my own name in here. "I'll call my lawyer in the morning," he said. "I'm dropping it, the contest, the developer, all of it. It was never really about you." He looked past her, down the road, at nothing. It was about being too late, years and years too late, to say sorry to somebody who was already gone. "You're not too late for everybody," Delia said. She nodded at the new ramp at the quiet house behind him. "When the orchard's back on its feet, there'll be work, and a share of what it makes. Verna fed this whole valley. I don't see why her own family should be the one exception." She turned to go. "Read your letters, Curtis. All of them." She's still in there talking. She drove home in the early dark with the cab empty beside her and the heater going. And somewhere on that road, between his valley and hers, she understood that she had already stopped thinking about the $60,000. It had quietly become unthinkable. She was staying. The sealed letter was waiting on the bed. She lit the lamp and sat down with it and broke the old wax at last, and a photograph slid out into her lap. A small girl in a red coat stood in a summer orchard, caught mid-laugh, both hands full of apples too big for them, squinting into the sun the same way the woman in Delia's only other photograph squinted into the sun. It was her, 6 years old, here, happy, in a moment she had no memory of, and now would never lose. She read Verna's last words to her by lamplight. "My Delia," the letter said. "If you are reading this, then you came home. I always knew you would. I am sorry I could not put this in your hands while I was alive to see your face. They would not let me. You will understand that part very soon. There is one thing the other letters never told you, because I was saving it. When my finder confirmed your mother had passed, he brought me back a box of her things, the little she left behind. Among them was a letter she had written to me and never sent, because she did not have my address, only the memory of a road. I have kept that letter for you all this time. It was never mine to keep. It is the last thing I have to give you, and it is the best thing, and it is waiting where she slept. Go out to the bunkhouse. 3rd bunk on the left. The loose board behind it. Your mother left part of herself in this place, and I kept it safe for you. And now it is yours. Plant something the first spring. Don't wait until you feel ready. Don't wait for permission. The trees don't. They just go on giving in every season anybody lets them. Be like the trees, my girl. You already are. You were the day you walked back through my gate and could not stand to watch the fruit fall. I loved you for 1 October a long time ago, and I never once stopped. Welcome home." Verna. Tully was already at the bedroom door. Delia followed the old dog down the dark stairs and out across the yard. The cold gone sharp now, the first hard frost of the year stiffening the grass under their feet. The bunkhouse door swung in with a push. Inside stood the old bunks, the mattresses long gone, the wood stove cold, the low room where Verna had given a bed to everyone who ran out of other roads. Tully went straight to the 3rd bunk on the left and put her nose to the wall. The board came loose with a tug. Behind it, in the dry dark of the wall, sat a small tin box. Inside the tin, wrapped in a square of faded cloth, lay a single folded letter, the paper soft as fabric from age, the ink gone brown. Across the front, in handwriting Delia had never once seen in her life, was written a single word: Verna. It stopped her breath. She had never in her life held a line of her mother's hand. Not a birthday card. Not a note. Nothing. And here was her mother's writing on a scrap of paper a stranger had walled up and guarded like treasure. Delia knelt on the cold floor of the bunkhouse where her mother had summed her to sleep, and she ran her thumb once over the brown ink, and then she unfolded the last secret of her whole life, and for the first time she read her mother's words. "Dear Verna," it began. "I'm sorry I ran. You were the closest thing to home Delia and I ever had, and that is exactly why I couldn't stay. I was scared that if I stayed I would start to believe in it, and people like me don't get to keep things like that. I'm sick now, and I'm not getting better, and I'm writing to ask the hardest thing I've ever asked anybody. If you ever find her, Tell her I didn't leave because of her. Tell her she was the best thing I ever did. And if the world will let you, look after my girl. I can't give you one good reason to say yes. I only know you're the one person I ever met who might." Delia read it 3 times, and on the 3rd time her own name in her mother's writing stopped looking like ink and started sounding like a voice. Tell her she was the best thing I ever did. For most of her life, she had carried the opposite around inside her. The certainty that she had been the burden a frightened woman finally set down. Here was the truth, in her mother's own hand, kept warm for her across a lifetime by a woman she had never thanked. She folded the letter back along its old creases, the creases her mother's own fingers had pressed into the paper, and held it against her chest, as she had once held the photograph in the shelter, the only proof she came from someone. She had more proof now than she knew what to do with. There was a name, a road, a kitchen, a song. There was a woman who had searched for her across a lifetime, and a mother who, dying, had loved her enough to hand her on to the one good person she could find. It was almost too much to hold at once. She held it anyway. Outside the bunkhouse, in the dark over the rows, the first snow of the year had begun to fall, soft and slow onto 112 acres of sleeping trees. Delia sat with her mother's letter in one hand and the photograph of herself in the other, a homeless woman who was not homeless anymore. In the one place on earth 2 strangers had spent their whole lives making sure she would someday come back to. She was not going to sign anything. She was not going anywhere. Come spring, she would put something new in the ground. The snow that began that night came down for 3 days, and Delia stayed through all of it, and she stayed through the winter that followed. Curtis called Davra the very next morning, the way he'd promised, and dropped the contest. The developer's calls stopped a week later. The orchard was hers, free and clear, and the strange thing was that the legal victory turned out to be the smallest part of it. A judge's signature only settled who owned the dirt. The owning had already happened out in the rows with her bare hands weeks before, and nobody had needed to sign a thing for that. Winter is when you prune an apple orchard, and 112 acres gone wild for a season is a great deal of pruning. Delia and Sol worked the rows all through the cold months. Delia up the ladders with the long loppers, and Sol below calling which limbs to take, and slowly the trees came back into their shapes. "Take the ones growing in toward the middle," Sol told her the first hard morning, his breath smoking in the cold. "A tree wants to be a bowl, not a bush. Light has to reach the center or the fruit won't color." He watched her make the cut and nodded. "Verna taught me that standing right where you're standing. I taught it to 2 of her pickers who went off and bought orchards of their own. Now I'm teaching you. Nobody owns any of this, not really. We just hand it down the line." She was good at it. Better than good. Sol stopped correcting her by February and just worked alongside, and once she caught him watching her top a northern spy and he said only, "She'd have liked watching you do that," and went back to gathering brush. In the evenings, they pressed the bruised and split apples into cider in the cold barn until the whole place smelled of it. And Delia carried jugs into town, and the diner on the square bought every one and asked for more. Her body changed over those months. The warehouse ache in her back never fully left, but it quieted under the steady work and the regular food and a real bed every night. Her hands roughened and went sure. She put on the weight she had needed for a year. She slept the whole night through, every night, and stopped jolting awake at 4 in the morning ready to move along before anybody found her. She had a key of her own again, to a door of her own, and some mornings she would stand on the porch holding her coffee and looking at the land and have to remind herself it was real. One gray afternoon near the end of winter, Sol came up to the house and set something small on the yellow kitchen table without a word. It was a wooden apple, carved from cherry wood gone dark and smooth with handling, small enough to close a child's fist around, the bite marks of a 6-year-old's teeth still pressed into one side. "She carried this in her apron every day I knew her," Sol said. "Near 40 years. At the end, in the home, she gave it to me and made me promise. Said, when the girl comes and she's ready, this goes to her. Not before. She'll know when." He cleared his throat. "I figure planting season is ready enough." Delia picked it up. It fit her palm. It must have fit the same palm once before, when the palm was small, and a flicker of memory almost surfaced, the warmth of a kitchen and a low voice singing about a river. And then it settled back down into the place where the oldest things live. She did not cry. She held the little apple a long while, then set it on the windowsill over the sink, where the light caught it, where she would see it every time she washed a dish for the rest of her life. Word of the cider carried, and by the turn of the year the valley had begun finding its way back down her road. The man who'd driven her out from the station that first night turned up with a load of fence posts, and would not take money for them. Women from the church came to wash the years out of the farmhouse and stayed for coffee, and told Delia stories about Verna that she wrote down so she would not lose them. An old beekeeper 2 farms over offered to bring his hives back in the spring as he'd done for Verna. for nothing but a share of the honey. Somebody fixed the porch step. Somebody else left a flat of strawberry plants by the door. No note. Delia understood that she'd read the letters. This was the valley paying back, in the only currency it had, a debt it had owed a dead woman for half a century. She started paying it forward before she could have told you why. When the cider sold, she had Saul leave a jug or two on the porches he knew were having a hard winter. No name attached. Just there in the morning. It was the most natural thing in the world to her. She had learned it from a woman she could not remember, who had learned it from the trees. Spring came up the valley slow, and then, all at once, the grass greened. The rose that had stood like dead gray bones all winter pushed out leaf, and then, in the first warm week of May, the whole orchard broke into blossom at once. 112 acres of white and pink so thick you could hear the bees from the porch. People drove out the county road just to look at it. Verna's trees had bloomed every spring of their long lives, but they had not bloomed like this with somebody home to see it in a long time, and word got around the valley that the Tolliver place had come back. Curtis came that spring, the first time on a Saturday. Awkward in the yard, his daughter in a wheelchair on the new grass beside him. A thin girl of about 10 with her father's serious eyes and a knit cap pulled down over a head the chemo had left bare. Delia walked them down the blooming rows, and the girl reached up, and Delia bent a low branch down so the child could put her whole face into the blossoms, and the girl laughed, and Curtis turned away and pretended to study something on the far hill. After that, he came most weekends. He was a contractor, and the farmhouse and the bunkhouse and the barn held a lifetime of repairs nobody had gotten to, and his hands knew exactly what hers did not. He reframed the sagging porch and put a new roof on the bunkhouse and never once mentioned a bill. They did not talk much about what had happened. They didn't need to. He had read his letters, and the letters had done the talking. One afternoon, up on the bunkhouse roof, he called down to her, "She'd be glad you didn't let me wreck it." And that was as close as either of them ever came to saying the whole of it out loud. In April, on a still morning with the ground finally warm enough, Delia planted the first new tree. She had grafted it herself over the winter, in Saul's way. In Verna's way, a cutting off the old Arkansas black joined onto fresh rootstock. The wound bound and waxed and kept on the kitchen windowsill beside the wooden apple until it took. She dug the hole at the head of the rose where everyone would pass it, set the young tree in, and firmed the soil around it with her hands. And Saul stood by with the watering can, and Tully lay in the new grass with her gray muzzle on her paws and watched them work. It was a small thing, a single sapling among 112 acres of giants, but it was the first tree planted on that land by somebody who meant to be there when it bore, and that made it the most important tree in the orchard. The mother and the boy came in June. Delia was on the porch shelling peas when she saw them at the top of the drive, a young woman with a duffel bag over her shoulder and a boy of about 5 holding her hand, standing at the leaning gate, reading the words painted across the top board just as Delia herself had read them on a cold night the autumn before. The woman's clothes were wrong for the weather and right for sleeping in. The boy's shoes were held together with tape. Delia knew the whole story before either of them said a word, because she had lived it, and because her own mother had stood in almost that very spot a lifetime ago with a noisy 6-year-old by the hand and nowhere left to go. She set the peas down and walked up the rows to meet them. "We saw the sign in town," the woman said. Defensive already, braced for the no. "It said you take on pickers. We're not pickers, I won't lie to you, but I can clean, I can cook. I'll do anything. Just for a little while. Just till I get us on our feet." Her chin came up. "I can work. I'm not asking for charity." "I know you can," Delia said. "Everybody who comes down this road can work. That's not what the gate is about." She crouched to the boy's level. "You like apples?" The boy nodded, wary. "Good. There's 112 acres of them out back, and come fall I'm going to need every hand I can get, including small ones." She straightened and looked at the mother, and she gave the woman the one thing anybody had ever really needed to give her, which was the benefit of the doubt. "There's a bunkhouse out back with a new roof and clean beds, a stove and food, and you can stay as long as you need and not one day less. We'll sort out the work later. First thing first." Her eyes went to the boy's taped-together shoe, and she decided that was the first project. "Come on, both of you. You look like you'll go over. Let's get you fed." The harvest came in October, as it always had on that land, whether anybody was there to take it or not. But this year somebody was, and not just somebody. They picked for 3 weeks straight, all of them. Saul up the tall ladders, Delia working the lower branches, Curtis on the weekends with his truck, the young mother quick and tireless once she stopped expecting to be sent away, and the boy carrying apples 2 at a time to the crates and eating nearly as many as he carried. Twice Curtis brought his daughter, who could not climb but could sit at a folding table in the shade, and sort keepers from cider apples and feel for an afternoon like a girl with a job instead of a patient. The young mother surprised herself out there. By the second week, she had stopped flinching when a strange truck came up the drive. By the third, she was the one teaching the boy to twist a stem clean. One evening, climbing down off a ladder with the sun going low and gold across the loaded rows, she stopped beside Delia and looked at all of it, and said, quiet, like she was afraid to jinx it, "I forgot a place could feel like this." Delia knew exactly what she meant. She had stood in this same orchard a year before with leaves in her hair, unable to believe any of it was hers to keep. The diner took crates. The church took bushels. Delia drove a load to the Saturday market on the square, and people who had bought Verna's apples their whole lives bought hers now and called her by name. And an old man she had never met held a wine sap up to the light and said it tasted the same as he remembered, which Delia understood by then to be the highest praise the valley had to give. And on the cold, bright mornings, she loaded the back of the truck and left boxes on porches up and down the valley. No note, just there at first light, exactly as they had once appeared on hers. On the last day of picking, they ate supper out in the rows. All of them plates balanced on crates. Sol and Curtis arguing happily about the right way to keep a northern spy through winter. The boy asleep against his mother before the food had gone cold. Delia sat a little apart and watched the long table Verna had set, without ever knowing who would one day come to sit at it. It was the boy who found the wooden apple. He had taken it off the windowsill to compare against the real thing, and he came running up the rows with it clutched in his fist, worried, certain he was in trouble. "It doesn't work," he said. "It won't come off the tree like the others." Delia knelt down in the dirt in front of him. "That one's special," she said. "A long time ago, a woman gave it to a little girl who used to live here, a girl about your size who loved this place. The girl had to go away before she was ready, but she came back. It took her a while. She came back." She folded the boy's fingers around the smooth, dark wood. "You hold on to it for now. There's always one apple on a farm that isn't for eating. It's there to remind you that you belong somewhere." The woman and her boy did not leave when the picking was done. By then, the boy had started at the school in town and made a friend or two, and his mother had taken over the kitchen and the account books with a quiet competence that told its own story about the life she had run from. And the bunkhouse had a curtain in its window and a kettle of its own. Delia never asked how long they meant to stay. She had promised them not one day less than they needed, and she found she meant it, the same as Verna must have, which was to say forever, if forever was what it took. There was work enough for 3, and the orchard had room. It had always had room. A child had once run wild through these rows and woken a grieving woman back into her own life, and the place had been waiting quietly ever since to do the same for whoever came next. That was what Verna had built. That was what she had handed down. One night that fall, with the woman and her boy asleep in the bunkhouse where Camille and Delia had once slept, where the loose board was nailed shut again over an empty tin, Delia sat on the porch in the dark with the old dog beside her and finally understood the thing she had been circling for months. Real family was never the people who shared your blood. It was the people who kept your name in a drawer and waited. Family was a woman who fed half a valley and grieved a borrowed child for the rest of her life, and left 112 acres to a stranger, so one lost girl would have somewhere to come home to. It was an old man who mowed a single path and kept one room aired for years, on the chance that the right person would someday walk back through the gate. Blood had nothing to do with any of it. Verna had taught her that without ever getting to say a single word to her face. She thought about the geranium on the shelter windowsill, the half-dead one she had watered every morning because it just needed somebody to remember it was there. Back then, she had believed she was talking about a plant. She understood now that she had been talking about herself, and about Verna, and about the orchard, and about the woman and the boy asleep in the bunkhouse, and about every forgotten thing in this world that turns out not to be dead at all, only waiting on one person to come along and remember it. A woman she had never heard of had left her everything. For a long time, Delia had thought of it only as a thing she had been given. Sitting on the porch that autumn night, a full year now from the cold evening she had first walked down this road, with her mother's photograph and a carved wooden apple inside on the windowsill, and a young family safe under her roof, she understood at last that it had run the other way first. A frightened girl of 6 had given Verna Tolliver a whole season of noise and singing in a house gone silent, had given a grieving woman a reason to keep the bunkhouse warm and the orchard alive for the rest of her days. Delia had given Verna something first, a long time ago, and never known it. The farm was not a gift. It was a thank you, mailed across a quarter century, and it had finally arrived. Out past the porch rail, the orchard stood dark and heavy with the last of the fruit, the young grafted tree at the head of the rows no taller than the boy who would help pick it in the years to come. Somewhere down in the bunkhouse, a child slept who would never have to spend his whole life wondering, as Delia had, whether anybody had ever wanted him. Delia would see to that. She would remember he was there. Inside the house, on the windowsill, the little wooden apple kept its place in the dark, and out in the rows the last apples held to the branches, waiting, as everything on that farm had always waited, for the right hands to come and take them down.